Well, welcome to another episode of the Grazing Sheep Podcast. I'm your host, Big Tom Perkins, along with Dr. Cameron Meyerly. So, what you been up to this week there, Cameron?
Well, it's been a busy week. We've been getting all the mature ewes and the commercial flocks sorted and getting ready to breed those for a, a later spring lambing group.
Uh-huh.
I assume you've been working on fence.
We are DUN done.
Oh,
We,
really?
we have finally finished this fence.
Have you stopped dreaming about it?
No, I keep thinking there's something wrong with the fence now, and I have to go out in the middle of the night and check it. That's the dream now.
Okay. I mean, I was there a couple weeks ago, and you didn't have a whole lot left to do.
Yep.
That at least that was on your contract. So, how many total linear feet did you guys install?
The contract was for 13,000 feet. And when we measured everything out, we had 80 feet left on the contract. So we just put in another fence. So we ended up with like 13,700 and some feet altogether.
Really? Okay, and that's 13,000 feet um, of 5 wire.
Yep.
So you multiply that by five,
Yep. That's how much wire we used, whatever that is. It was like
68,500 feet.
okay, and divide that by
So,
4,000, and that will tell you how many rolls of wire we used.
well, I was gonna say what's more interesting is if we divide that, that's only 12.9 miles of fence.
Of wire.
So
Of
of
wire.
of wire. Yes, yes. That's important to specify. But if all were electrified, we would have to think about that's the distance that we're trying to electrify
Yep.
with every individual wire. So I guess we talked about this a little bit in the spring, more in the sense of, you getting started with this. So let's do a quick rundown. 5 wire fence. What was your spacing on this fence? And it's all high tensile wire, 12 and a half gauge or 14 gauge.
It's 12 and a half gauge. According to NRCS specifications, your post can be no more than 25 feet apart. Now, it's important to remember, too, this is NRCS in Pennsylvania.
Right.
But I do know in other states, whatever you're doing through NRCS can be very different. But yeah, 25-foot spacings on the on the post
Okay.
was the max you were allowed to go.
Right. And I don't know that I'd want to go, with the topography of your farm. I don't know that I'd feel comfortable with high tensile wire going much further
Yeah,
than
when I lived in the
25.
Shenandoah Valley in Virginia, it was quite common to see because that valley, a lot of that valley's fairly flat. It was pretty common to see posts that were 50 feet apart, and
Right.
and a lot of those were 8-strand wire for cattle back in the day, and
Man,
but
and if they're that far apart though, you better hope your tensioner is willing to hold up. I mean, you've got to pull that stuff awfully, awfully tight.
yeah, well, they would
And
have those. I can't think what they're called, but battens, wooden battens.
okay. Oh
But
yeah,
it's
the
like that two by
spacers.
yeah, like that 2x2 board with a bunch of grooves cut in it, and
Yep.
then we just snap it into the wires, kind of a thing. You
Yep.
would see those in there quite a bit, and
Okay. And I think you
I
have
figured
to.
too if I had issues with sheep going through the wire at even at the 25 feet, I would make battens or buy battens and put them in to keep that
Yeah, and I
wire
think you
close
can either
together
get
so they couldn't separate it.
the wood ones. I believe like that's still an option, um, or the plastic, a PVC composite that uh, similar. We'll get into the post that you used here in a minute, but uh, also find some fiberglass ones out there that
Yeah.
have some sun coating on. I mean, a lot of options compared to what maybe we've had previously. And the
Hmm.
reason I say, I wouldn't go much further than 25 feet in your situation is just hills. A small
Exactly.
change in the lay of the land, and all of a sudden that wire is right on the ground.
Yeah,
Or
we had one place where we had to put in an H brace because of change in elevation, and in that one it was as we were pulling the wire would have raised off the ground. So it was you're going along, everything's fairly flat, and then all of a sudden you start up this hill, and
and you also put an H brace instead of making a full run horizontally across the farm. You did two separate runs, so you actually doubled the number of H braces, uh, terminations there by putting in an alleyway in the middle. Correct.
yep, and that's
Okay.
kind of the way the farm lays. All the way up through that is basically, for lack of a better term, it's basically a valley. And we would have had to put, because of the change in elevation, we probably would have had to put two H braces in anyhow, even if we had one continuous line all the way across the farm, just
Right.
because
Which
of those changes in elevation.
I think that goes, yeah, it's an addition to the flexibility of this fencing system.
Yep.
And I haven't shied away from the fact that when we're thinking of remodeling fencing layouts, regardless of livestock species, yeah, I've been very vocal on, this is the layout that I'm not going to say everybody should have, but if we're looking at improving our rotational grazing system, I think this is one of the more practical systems that I've seen. I think from a especially what you're doing with the daily move and the amount of work involved currently, what this will provide to the labor savings. I can justify the fence that you put in very quickly.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
and that's where with or without a contract, with the cost sharing, NRCS, conservate, whoever it is, FSA, I don't, doesn't matter. Something that you could implement with personal dollars, with uh, that farm income to justify the fencing cost. And if you want to talk, uh, if you don't mind sharing, some of the cost analysis on this, do you know what you have in it per foot?
Yeah, it's well, I think the thing to remember is the longer your fence is, the cheaper it is per foot, only because it's your ends, your H braces are what cost you the most money to put in.
Right. Well, and I'd even argue, so you only had H braces. I remember when they were doing fence at WVU on where a new paddock that we were going to put sheep, it was like 40 acres.
Hmm.
The corner braces, and this is before poles, before the wooden posts were, $20-$30 a
Yeah.
piece,
Yep.
for those corners. To do a corner, I want to say it was like $120 a
It
corner.
it probably would be. So mine, I broke mine down, and these are all things pretty much that you could just get at Tractor Supply. There's more expensive posts out there, and we did buy some of those. Um, but I gotta admit, I the maybe the quality of the post was maybe a little better at some of these other places other than Tractor Supply. But man, there were just as many crooked posts in their pile of wood, and there were just as many posts that were had big cracks in them and the whole bit. I just think they were heavier. They were treated. I think there was maybe a little more whatever they treat them with, a little better. But we ended up with right at $75 for each end that we built.
Really? And if you don't,
And I
if
was
we can take a
amazed at
minute,
that. I was
so
absolutely
when you're,
amazed at that. So that included, so we used a 6-inch post on the end, and
I
then
was gonna say, what
so
is
that's
an
a
H
vertical,
brace?
and then we used a 5-inch post for the inside vertical, and then the horizontal post, we just used a 4-inch post.
Yeah,
And
and so
that 6-inch post was $22. That 5-inch post was 18, and then the 4-inch post was 14. So then you have to have a couple of pins in there to for that horizontal post. And and honestly, we just used the I think they're like 8-inch or 10-inch. I think they're 10-inch pins. And so you're supposed to use one 10-inch pin, and then you're supposed to use a 5-inch pin. Well, instead of buying 5-inch pins, we just cut the 10-inch pins in half
right,
because they they were cheaper. Not by a whole lot, but they were just cheaper. And I started doing this years ago just because the first fence I ever built, I ran out of 5-inch pins. And rather than run to town to buy more 5-inch pins, I just, you know, cut a 10-inch pin in half and voila, I got two 5-inch pins. Funny how math works like that.
right. And I was gonna
But
say, like, we're sitting here thinking everybody's been building 13,000 feet of fence, here here over the last 6 months. When we're talking about H braces, and it seems kind of silly to describe, that's our terminating end of a linear fence. We can also have those in line, and the value of having that is, it looks like an H. We have two uprights that have been put in the ground, and Tom's were wooden posts, and then we have an 8 foot. I'm assuming it was 8 foot
yeah,
horizontal piece,
yeah,
and we actually pull an additional piece of high tensile wire going the opposite direction, the opposite angle from the top of the post to the bottom of the other post, going the opposite direction of the way our weight is pulling, so that it allows support um,
yeah. So
for
basically,
us to
that inside vertical post is pushing the horizontal post against your outside post.
the top of the outside post. And
Right.
so it's all of the force of the high tensile pulling on the outside post is hopefully being counteracted by that horizontal post and that interior post.
Yep.
And you'll see, ones that are not have not been done correctly, or um, if you see an end post pulling out of the ground,
Yep.
we haven't had that. We don't get that horizontal line exactly where we need it. There's a lot. There is a lot to fencing. I think kudos to Tom for having the time to research some stuff and then some previous experience to really go out and do it on your own, because it's not for everybody. Um,
Yeah, the first high tensile fence I ever built, I actually walked over to my neighbors and looked at theirs to see how to build that H brace. And I'm not gonna lie, I bet I walked over there 3 times before I built my first H brace because I get all the way back home and forget which way I was supposed to put that horizontal or that diagonal wire, which end it was supposed to be on. And then once
yeah,
it kinda sunk in, once I built one, I'm like, "Oh, well, that makes sense because that's constantly pushing into that other post, and that's what
yeah.
holds it all together." It's kind of
And
amazing.
if you go the opposite direction,
Yeah, you're just
that
helping
end
to pull it out of the ground.
that end does not last, because
Yeah.
I've seen a couple. I've seen a couple of those done, and it's like, oh boy. Well, you learn pretty quickly which direction you're supposed to go.
Yep.
Um, when that happens, because there's a lot of labor involved. There's significant material compared to the rest of our fence. And I guess while we're talking about end posts, and this is a challenging thing to describe, because visual would would
Yeah.
be easy. But we'll see how good our descriptive speaking is. But one of the issues, if you've ever dealt with high tensile fence, one of the biggest issues is that brace wire, that diagonal wire moving from the top of the inside post to the bottom of that outside post
Yep.
will have tension on it.
Yep.
And so I know some of our fence, we've put in some tighteners, some tensioners that we can tighten down that brace wire. And uh, a more traditional model is what Tom would have done. And you just, I thought this was pretty good. You just went out and cut like a twist stick, 2 inch by 2 inch oak
Yep.
stick that we go in between the wire, and then we just keep twisting, twisting, twisting until we get it tight enough, and then it actually rests on
The horizontal
the
part.
horizontal bar.
Yep.
And so the issue that we'll run into when we're running high tensile fence, we're going past that diagonal brace wire, and we can see some arcing from our electric lines to our diagonal brace wire.
Yep.
And we've attached some insulators to some of ours, and that if it comes off or it slides over, we're always checking if we have a short in the fence and we're not getting the juice through that wire that we'd like. We're always going and checking those H braces or those corner terminations. And Tom actually, yeah, because you're building new fence and you've dealt with a similar situation where your fence
Yep.
shorts out on that brace wire,
Yep.
you put in insulators, inline insulators for that brace wire in every area that that fence would be able to touch that brace wire, and then added a crimp to either end of that insulator.
Yep.
And you want to talk about those crimps again? It's a little thing, but when I saw it, I was like, oh my goodness! And maybe this is what everybody else does, but I don't think it is because I've never seen it. Not that I go around and look at everybody's brace wires and how they're putting insulators on, but I was like, oh man, Tom, you need to patent that right now, and for intellectual property.
So
It,
as we build it, we put that insulator on, and we added just the regular crimp sleeves to them. Um, but when I first ever built a high tensile fence, we didn't have any of those insulators in there. We didn't have any crimps in there. Later, from Kencove, I found what they call a spiral insulator that will actually twist onto your high tensile wire once it's already up, as opposed to running the wire through it. And then, so we used those, but we found that over time those would vibrate or the wind would blow and they'd slide over and you still get arcing. And then we found that Kencove makes an open-ended crimp sleeve that you can just set over top of the wire and then use your crimping tool and crimp it down to hold that in place. So on some of mine, I have those open-ended ones on there only because we were running out of regular crimp sleeves and we needed those to finish up that section of wire that we were working on at the time. Well, I didn't want to, run to town at 7 o'clock at night and get more crimps, so we just used some of those. But yeah, we actually crimped that insulator in place so that it can't move in the future.
right, and I love that idea. When we're talking about troubleshooting fence, and now you have a significant, what do we say, 5 miles? No, 12 miles
Yeah,
of
wire.
of wires, going through 13,000 feet. Do you want to walk every H brace to make sure that it's not an insulator that's slid down the line, and then you're arcing over to that brace wire. So I mean, that was just one of the items that um, made note of. Was like, oh, that's a great idea. I think the other aspect, and I'm not gonna lie, I was pretty skeptical on the when we were talking initially and talking about the timeless post, and um, I've seen pictures. I don't know, or maybe a couple farms driving by here or there, but I don't know that I've ever seen, implementing the timeless fence post, and we'll have you talk about that here in a minute. To the extent that you used it in this system, and uh, in terms of a clean look, and again, I'm not the one that built the fence, but the appearance of the ease of putting those wires through and being done, um, it the next high tensile fence we build will probably have some timeless fence posts
Yeah, I
involved.
would agree. Those posts, I used an 1 3/4 post that was 5.5 foot tall, 5.5 altogether, and you're putting 18 inches of that in the ground. And so we're not
Right.
building, we're not building a crazy tall fence because we've got sheep. We don't, if we had buffalo or giraffes or, you know, we need a much taller fence, but we
And
didn't.
this is different than your steel T post.
Exactly. It's a PVC post that is treated so that you don't have to worry about the UV degradation, I guess, or whatever that's called. That
And
happens to
still in a
those. So they don't
T
break down, and
still in a T shape.
it's still in the T shape. It has a bit of a V cut in the bottom, so it has a bit of a point to it to make it a little easier to drive in. Um, we're on strip mine ground. That ground is unbelievably hard. It's unreal how hard this ground is. So we took a battery powered, I guess it was 20-volt DeWalt hammer drill and bought an inch and an eighth, 18-inch long bit and just drilled pilot holes.
So an inch and an eighth diameter
Yep.
with 18 inches long, and
Yep.
you were drilling. So you're essentially, it's a mini auger at that point, and
Yeah.
you're augering, like mini augering out where these T posts need to go. And
Yeah.
that was my one point or question. Yeah, these are not, they will not pound like a steel T post.
Because they're PVC, they want to flex a little bit,
Okay.
and they are hard to get in the ground if you have hard ground. Now, some of our ground was never strip mined, a very small portion of it. And most of those, we would be running out of batteries. We had 3 batteries, and sometimes we could only put in 7 posts because our ground was so hard. We use up the 3 batteries, and then we have to go recharge the batteries. Other times, there was one day we did like 32 posts. We both looked at each other, couldn't believe we cut that many posts in before our batteries died. But the ground was a little softer. Um, but on if you've got ground that you don't have any issue putting the T post in, you don't need to drill a hole. You can just drive these in. And there's plenty of times that we did that. But on this strip mine ground, it is so hard and so compacted with mostly black shale and just small little stones, and that we had to pre-drill holes. And,
Right.
and
Do you think
still,
you would?
and still some of those it took, with a handheld post driver, 45 or 50 pounds to still get those things in the ground.
Yeah, and there's a mark on that post for
Yep.
how deep you need to have it set.
Yep. You don't have to measure it out. It does have a mark on it. And those posts were $9.50 a piece, as opposed to if you were using the 4-inch posts that were $14 a piece.
Right. A 4-inch wood post.
Right. And you don't
Yeah.
have to buy um yeah,
Insulators.
you don't have to buy insulators. And my guess is that if we tried to drive those posts in with a shaver post driver, those 4-inch posts, I'll bet a bunch of those we would have destroyed before
Snapped
we
off.
got them in the ground.
Yep, I guarantee it. Yeah, and that's the other aspect of it. Um, you were talking about pre-drilling those T-post slots. And do you think even in that ground that's not as hard on your farm, is it worth piloting that hole to, so many inches, maybe it's 10 inches, maybe it's 12. Is it worth piloting that hole so that your T post is straight? You don't have a bunch of crooked uh
I think it
inline
could be.
posts.
Yeah, I think it could be. We would get down through the topsoil and then we hit the clay, and the clay would just want to bind up the bit, and it just didn't want to. The drill would want to jump in your hand, and ours has some safety thing on it, so it won't twist your arm off. But and so once we get down into that clay, we just kind of look at each other and say, "Oh, we're just going to chance it and drive it." The fear was you're going to run into a big sandstone or something. But most of those, yeah, we could just drive them down through that clay. And we had one post in the whole stinking 13,000 feet. One post where we true built or pre-drilled the hole and then pushed the post in by hand.
Nice. Nice.
And we were like, well, good thing that's on a nice straight run, because that would probably just pull right out of the ground as soon as we tightened things up if it was in a dip. But
Yep, guarantee it. Yeah.
that
Yeah.
one post out of all the hundreds of posts we put in, one we just pushed in by hand. And it was
Mm.
amazing. It was in a place we did not think that would happen, but it did. But just for some figures, by the time we were all done, um, oh, now I lost it. So we figured this out just on if you were to do 1,000-foot run with 5 wires in the timeless post and your 2 H braces, it would cost you $750.
Okay. So you're at like 75 cents a foot.
75 cents a foot. But
And is
remember,
that
the
with a
most expensive
single?
part is your H braces. So
Right.
it's not as crazy price as what you think it is, but you do have to have some tools. If you're able to dig a hole and put the post in and tamp the post down and all that, your wooden post, you're way ahead of the game. We have a hydraulic auger that goes on the front of the skid loader, and so we drilled holes with that. And sometimes that ground was so hard, we'd have the front 2 wheels of the skid loader off the ground, and we're just sitting there with that auger going, "Arr, arr," and it was just pulling up dust as it was eating its way through whatever the heck was down in there.
What size auger were you using?
We used a 6-inch auger, and our
Okay.
ground our ground is so hard that most of these 6-inch posts are right around 6.5 inch. And
Right.
with our hydraulic post driver, it still took 45 whacks with the hydraulic post driver to drive that 6-inch post or 6.5 inch post into a 6-inch hole.
How many did it take without the piloting of the
But
hole?
we only put in 2 or 3 posts like that, and it was
Okay.
anywhere from 150 whacks to 175 whacks. And you couldn't get the
Were
post.
those
You couldn't get the post to go straight, and we have the top
I'm
of the post all mushroomed. It was
right.
bad.
I was gonna ask how plumb to the world were those poles once you those
Not
posts
very.
once
They're
you
really ugly. If
right.
I wasn't so cheap and so sick of building fence, I would tear them out and rebuild them,
Yeah.
because they are ugly. You saw it.
Right.
They're
I
bad.
that's why I asked. So
They're really crooked.
so I mean, and that's the sad thing is everything else is so in line. And I thought it was kind of fun. You could tell like where you started, and it
Yeah.
didn't take you long to figure out what you wanted to do
Yep.
and how like what best practice was. And
Yep.
then you see like this progression, a very short, you know, stint of well, they started here, this wasn't working, they got the auger, these posts are going in. Same with the pulling of the fence. You know, you'd mentioned how many feet were your um, runs
Most of
normally?
them, well, they're all different lengths, but most of them on one side of the farm, they're all right around 680 feet,
Okay,
because we used we started on one side of the farm because there's a long straight line, and that was a line we used. And we measured all of our posts, like the 25 feet apart. We measured everything from that side of the farm. So we basically went from west to east. And it was kind of a fluke, but when you stand back and walk around, or just driving around the farm, anytime you look up at those posts, you always see a line. It doesn't matter if you're at the end looking all the way down the fence, there's a line of posts, as there should be. But you see all these diagonal lines now because all those posts are, laid out the same, the same 25 feet apart. We always started from the same side. So you see all these crazy diagonal lines of posts that you didn't see before, which is just kind of aesthetically cool to look at.
It is fun. And the reason I asked what your average run was, your distance in one set of fencing, um, was you started out with polywire. So you'd put your end post in, you'd pull polywire across, and that's where you knew where to drill, where to pilot that
Right.
hole for that timeless post. And the issue with polywire that we know, and you knew going into it, uh, any breeze or wind, we get some movement on that post. And so pretty early on in your project, had a little bit of wind, and fence didn't end up quite as straight as you wanted, correct?
No, it has this nice little slight arc to it. We put in about 4 posts when I realized, wait a minute, we've moved this wire over ever so slightly and on each post, and we're not heading towards our H brace. And so we just corrected course, and we were not about to pull all those posts back out and start over again. So we're
Right.
only off maybe a foot. It's not much. But what makes it worse is there's an optical illusion with this hill. And I have dealt with this optical illusion my entire life. Mowing hay out across there, you'd be trying to make a nice straight line, or plowing, you try to make a nice straight line. And you'd go up this hill thinking you were still in this nice straight line because you can't see across because of this hill. And
Right.
all of a sudden you come to the top and realize you weren't anywhere near where you wanted to be. And so
Right.
even with that fence, as straight as it is, when you stand at one end of the farm and look all the way across that, you can't really see it. But you start to get off to the side, and because of that hill, it really exaggerates it. It
Yeah.
makes it look like it's
Unless
5 or 6 feet out, and it's not.
Right. And unless Tom points it out to you, you don't notice. But I
No,
thought
you
it was a
can't
good
see
point
it.
to bring up, because honestly, that's probably where I would have started thinking, well, I've got this geared reel. This is way easier to wind up than
Yeah.
high
'Cause we
tension.
ended up
And
we ended up pulling the high tensile wire across the bottom, and then
right.
you pick it up and drop it. And CJ got really good at making it make a wave all the way across, and it would lay down perfect. And the joke was he would do that 3 times and call that good. And I'd always laugh and say, "Well, I'd do it 3 times, and all 3 of them would still be wrong."
Right.
But his came out very, very straight. Now the bad part of that was then when we were ready to, yeah, we had all our posts in, and then we had to go to the middle of that wire and cut it and pull it all the way back, and then feed it through. And
Right.
that
And
basically,
why were you feeding it through? For those that aren't familiar with timeless
because those
fence
timeless
posts.
posts are all pre-drilled with holes in them that are 3 inches apart, and your first hole is 6 inches off the ground if you put the post into where the mark is.
So the post is the insulator.
And if you go on Timeless's website, that's written everywhere. The post is
Oh,
the
is it?
insulator.
Oh, is it really? Oh
It is.
no.
Yep.
I
That's
did
their
not.
that's their catchphrase.
Maybe it's subliminal messaging because I was not aware of that. That's
Yeah,
funny. Well,
but
it's
it's
working. Uh,
so far we really like them.
Good.
We have no issues with them at all. We'll see how it goes through the freezing and thawing and all that kind of stuff, but I don't think it's going to be an issue at all.
Yeah.
And I know some of those posts we got, maybe 8, 10 inches in the ground, and then there was a rock off to the side, where we had drilled, and the post just was not going to go. It took 2 of us to pull those posts back out of the ground. They are tight.
Really.
Yeah, I was amazed how hard they were to get back out. We'd have
Yeah.
to, and we couldn't use our hands. We took step in posts, and that part you step in the ground. We shoved those through the hole, and then and then we had to do that with 2 posts, and then each of us would grab our own post and pull, and that was how we got them back out. It was not an easy thing to do. So,
So
well,
you
we're running up
mentioned
on our time already.
perfect.
So we thank you all for listening to the Grazing Sheep podcast. If you have any questions, you can reach out to me at bigtomperkins@gmail.com. There's a Facebook page called the Grazing Sheep Podcast. You can like and follow that. You can leave some comments on there or even questions on there. So Cam, it's been good catching up with you, buddy, and we'll talk to you later.
Sounds good, Tom. You have a good one.
All righty. Bye.